Alright, Bobby Rio back here for another video from our Girl Getting Secrets program. Today we're going to be talking about how to keep a conversation going and how to do it through the use of hooks. In this video is going to be a how-to guide for keeping a conversation interesting. We're going to go over what to say and do, and as I've keep stressing, the attitude and the way you come across as you say or do it. The reason we're going to be talking about this idea of keeping a conversation going and hooks is because you might have found yourself in one of these three situations. Maybe you've started a conversation with a girl and you kind of sparked an initial interest or attraction in her, but soon enough the conversation just starts to sputter out. Or maybe you hit what I call a conversation plateau, and that's where you've talked to a girl and you're talking to her maybe a topic like your favorite vacation spots. And you're talking about that for a while, but as you're talking, you can see that less and less of her enthusiasm is going into the conversation, and you're having a lot of difficulty taking it away from what you're currently talking about and moving it into a more emotional context, somewhere more conducive for attraction. And like I just said, when you're stuck in either of those things, stalling out or plateauing, you're probably experiencing that it's really hard to create that connection and that attraction. So hooking, what hooking does, it's a conversation technique we're going to be talking about today. That's going to help you avoid those awkward silences. And in fact, it's going to show you how to use the silence as an opportunity to even increase the tension of the conversation and use silence as an attraction building technique. It's also going to help you avoid boring conversations. It's going to allow you enough time to build attraction. What happens a lot of times is, because we don't know how to keep a conversation going and we wind up stalling out, the woman's impression of us is not it's not geared towards who we really are if we had enough time. It's geared towards like that short little glimpse of us that she got. And in order to really create attraction and use a lot of the attraction building techniques you're learning, you need the time to do it. And these hooks buy you time. And finally, one of the other great things that they do is by having the ability to know that you can walk into a conversation and you can start it and use these hooks to kind of capture her interest and get her very engaged in the conversation. It gives you a lot more confidence to walk up to a woman and do it without that anxiety that you might have when you think about maybe running out of things to say or getting the awkward silence. Using these hooks will cure that, and it will give you a very confident demeanor in your conversations. So we're going to talk about something developed by a Russian psychologist, something theorized by the Russian psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik, and it's called the Zeigarnik effect. Now, this is sort of a definition of it that I want to read you so that you can get an idea of this. This is going to be really important. Not so much knowing the name or the definition, but the theory behind this and what exactly it is that you're going to be doing in your conversations with women is based on this theory. So let's get a firm grip of what this theory is. So it says, the Zeigarnik effect is the tendency to experience intrusive thoughts about an object that was once pursued and left incomplete. It seems to be human nature to finish what we start, and if it's not finished, we experience dissonance. Zeigarnik theorized that an incomplete task or unfinished business creates psychic tension within us. This tension acts as a motivator to drive us towards completing the task or finishing the business. So what this psychologist found through a whole host of studies he did in the early 1900s is that humans are almost conditioned to need to know the answer to something. And if you don't tell them the answer, there's tension that begins to build in their brain until they know it, And that tension causes them to focus on what it is they want to know. So some examples of maybe how this plays out in your own life to get a more concrete feeling of this is, have you ever watched a movie or a sitcom? Maybe you were flipping channels on the television and you came across an episode of CSI, one of those detective shows. And even though you have really no interest in watching the show, once you start watching maybe even 10 minutes of it, it's really hard at that point to flip the channel. It's really difficult because you've been activated. Your brain goes into this state of psychic tension that now needs to know the answer. It needs to know what's going to happen. The same similar tension occurs when you're feeling... when somebody's telling you a story and they get cut off, for some reason they can't finish the story they were telling you, you get that same sense of psychic tension of needing to know what happened in the story. And what's funny is a lot of times it might not even be the most interesting story, or like I said, it may even be a horrible movie. In fact, it may even be a movie you've already seen. I can't even tell you how many times I'm flipping channels, watching, and the Karate Kid comes on. And even though I know the answer, he does the crane kick at the end and wins, I still need to know. I need to visually see the ending to know that he's going to win. I mean, it's like a ridiculous thing, but it's just a fact. It's the Zeigarnik effect. It's what causes this tension, and advertisers and stuff, they play into this. This is why whenever you're watching a TV show, they use the cliffhangers right before a commercial, because they know that if they give you a cliffhanger where you need to know, you're going to come back. You're going to watch the commercials. You're going to stay, and you're going to come back and watch the show. Another example of the Zeigarnik effect is, have you ever been in, talking to somebody or maybe in a car with them, and they giggle to themselves, or they laugh, or they kind of smirk to themselves, and you, have to know. You're like, what's so funny? What are you laughing about? And they're like, oh, nothing. I was just thinking of something. What were you thinking of? They're like, oh, something that just happened. And you're compelled to know, what it is they were thinking. You need to know. Similar things happen when, if you've ever dated a girl in the past, let's say, and she mysteriously ended it with you. And she never told you why. Maybe she just stopped answering your calls, or maybe she told you, I can't see you anymore, but never gave you a reason. Because of that, there's always that sense of incompleteness, and that girl is a lot harder to forget. I mean, maybe you have a girl like that, a girl you can't get out of your mind, a girl from your past that you're constantly going over what happened, what went wrong. Chances are it's because you were never given a clear answer, and you left with a feeling of incompleteness, and that causes that psychic tension that we keep talking about, that's holding your attention on her long after you should have forgotten about her. So how does the Zeigarnik effect relate to talking to girls and more of an initial conversation with them? Well, it forces engagement. Because we need to know something, by holding bits and pieces of information at arm's reach from them and kind of manifesting this feeling of incompleteness in them, you're forcing them to become engaged. The same way a cliffhanger forces us to stay after the commercial to know what happens. That's what you're going to be doing with what we're going to be talking about through the rest of this module. You're also going to create tension and anticipation. Creating this tension and anticipation works well because it allows her to think to herself. Now she's experiencing emotion. She's not just going through the motions of a conversation where she's just nodding and answering your questions. She's feeling things. She's feeling this tension and this anticipation. And because she has these emotions going, it's much more likely that you can turn those emotions into attraction and trigger these different attraction triggers inside of her. And one of the most important things the Zeigarnik effect does is, like I said, it buys you time. You may not know what you're going to say next. You may be running out of things to say. You may not know how to make this conversation interesting. But by employing what we're going to talk about in this video, you're going to have the time to do it. Unlike, let's say you start a conversation with a girl and you walk up, you compliment her, you use your opener, and she judges you very quickly. And maybe her initial judgment of you wasn't the best. She didn't have enough time for you to start teasing her and flirting with her and using attraction building techniques. Well, what the Zeigenderic effect really does is it allows the conversation to keep going long enough for you to start teasing and flirting and amping up the sexual tension. So let's talk about the first conversation rule, and that's always be creating hooks for later in the conversation. Creating hooks means creating incompleteness, manufacturing a desire to know, and then forcing her to probe. So let's give quick examples of hooks. That's really interesting. Period. You'll never guess. Period. That reminds me of the time. Period. The reason I keep stressing the word period when I say these is because you're not finishing those thoughts. You're saying things like, that's really interesting, but you're not telling her why it's really interesting. So let's say she says, I'm from New York. And you're like, that's really interesting. Now she has to know, why is that really interesting? You've just created that sense of incompleteness. You've manufactured a desire to know, and you're forcing her to probe. Same thing when you say, you'll never guess. Now it's like, you're not saying, you'll never guess, this just happened to me. You're saying, you'll never guess. And you're forcing her to invest her own desire to know. Same thing when you say, that reminds me of the time. You're each of these things, you're just saying something that is triggering a desire to know in her, and then forcing her to probe, oh, what happened that time? That's what you want to get out of her. You want her to keep the conversation going because she's so interested in figuring out or finding out what you just said or what you meant by what you just said. So the tricks to hooking are: make a statement, then shut up. That's why I said, you'll never guess, or that's really interesting. And then you don't say anything, because now you're making her know. You're forcing her to know, to try to find out. You avoid answering right away. So maybe she'll ask you a question, and instead of just giving her the answer right away, avoid answering it. And all these things we're going to give examples of as we go on. But right now I want to just show you some of the tricks to hooking. Some of the ways to do that, ways to avoid answering and ways to shut up, is to cast a hook and then begin talking about something else. Or cast a hook and then go silent, forcing her to probe. Answer boring questions with stories that hold her attention. Inject intriguing hooks into ordinary sentences. Don't explain everything, and vaguely hint at extraordinary things. I'm going to go over examples of all of these, because these are the elements of hooking. These are how you're going to hook the girl in your conversation. So let's go over each one individually with examples. So the first one is cast a hook and start talking about something else. So here's an example of how you can do that. I can tell your trouble. So I was with my friends this weekend and we decided, what do you mean I'm trouble? You just interrupted my story. Can I finish? So what we did there was we casted the hook, and you can see I put it in italics, and that's where I said, I can tell your trouble, pause. And then what you did is you just started telling her a story completely irrelevant to the statement you made about her. And now she needs to know, what do you mean? Now there's that sense of incompleteness. Why am I trouble? And you just sort of now kind of keep away from answering it as long as you can. Think about when you say to a woman, let's use the example of, you have really nice eyes. Here, let's give another example of how to cast a hook and go silent. I don't know if anyone else has ever noticed this, but I just noticed something really interesting about your eyes. Then shut up and wait for her response. See, what you did there was you hooked her by saying, I don't know if anybody ever noticed this, but I noticed something really interesting about your eyes. But you didn't give her what it was. So now she needs to know, what did this guy notice about my eyes? And she's going to be tempted to ask you and say, what is it? Now think about how much more this is effective than had you just said, oh, your eyes are really interesting. They're this bluish gray color. I never saw that before. Now she's disengaged. You just gave her the compliment. She can now say, oh, thank you, blah, blah, blah. But there's no sense of incompleteness as opposed to saying it this way. So you want to cast a hook and then shut up and wait for her response. You can also answer boring questions with a story that holds her attention to the end. So here's an example of how to do that. Her. So what do you do for a living? You. Did you ever see the movie American Beauty? Her. Yeah. You remember how he quit his job and worked at that burger joint and was so happy? Her. Yeah. What, do you work at McDonald's or something? No, duh. I was just thinking about the job I had back in high school and how cool it would be to just work there again. All careless and not giving a shit about anything. See, what you did there is she asked you a boring question like, what do you do for a living? Which you're going to get all the time. But instead of just answering that with, I'm a computer programmer, you opened up the conversation to not only create a hook by not telling her what you do and you know, going a roundabout way so that you never gave her that answer, so that loop is still open, that hook is still out there. But you've also given her a few more conversation topics, okay? Let's just look at this. So these are the things you said. Did you ever see American Beauty? You remember how he quit his job and worked at that burger joint and was so happy? I was thinking about the job I had back in high school and how cool it would be to just work there again, all careless and not giving a shit. So by doing that, you've given her 3 things to talk about. You can talk about the movie American Beauty. You know, maybe she'll say, oh, I love that movie, and you can kind of talk a little bit about that movie. Or you can talk about previous jobs. Because you mentioned your previous job back in high school, she may say, oh, what was that job? And then you can say, oh, I was a paper boy, and I remember just driving around. And you can say, so what other jobs did you have when you were growing up? So you can talk about previous jobs. Or you can just talk about being young and careless. Because the last thing you said is all careless and not giving a shit. And then you can kind of go into like, man, remember how great it was when you got out of school and like you didn't have to, you had no homework and you can just go out and meet your friends and play like manhunt out in the field and how cool that was. So by answering a question with a story that holds her attention, not only are you creating a hook, but you're also opening up new threads, new things to talk about. So here's another example of a way to create a hook, and this is inject intriguing hooks into ordinary sentences. So let me give you an example. I took a cooking lesson once. Went better than the salsa lesson I took that same year, but I can't come close to my grandmother's lasagna. Why is it that old ladies can cook so damn good? Her, what happened at the salsa lesson? See, what you did there was let's say you were talking about cooking and you wanted to tell her about a cooking lesson that you took and maybe talk about food for a minute. But you threw a hook in there and you said, went better than my salsa lesson. Because now she has to know what happened at the salsa lesson. It's just a way to throw new things out there to make her want to know more and keep her engaged and keep her attention focused on you. Because human beings, we all have ADD, and our minds start to wander and we start to think about a million other things. But the more you can keep her attention focused on you, the more she's going to find herself thinking, oh, this guy's really cool. Oh, yeah. I'm enjoying this conversation. So here's another way to use a hook. Don't explain everything. Smirking at something she's doing. What are you laughing at? Nothing, just amusing myself. Really simple, but really powerful because she wants to know what you were thinking. Why is this guy smirking? What is he thinking? And she'll probably probe and say, come on, what were you laughing at? What are you thinking? And you can just play with her. No, nothing, just something crossed my mind, made me laugh. So vaguely hint at extraordinary things. Another excellent way to use a hook to keep a conversation going. So here's an example. Last year when I was in, man, I've got a dirty mind. After last weekend, that's who you look like. The bartender reminds me of this weird girl I knew when I was little. Did you ever just get the feeling about someone? See how those are all hooks that keep you, that probe, make her probe, that make her want to know what you're going to say. What did it make you think about? Last year when I was in, what happened when you were there? Why do you have a dirty, man, I've got a dirty mind. Well, what are you thinking that made you say that? After last weekend, well, what happened last weekend? That's who you look like. Well, who do I look like? The bartender reminds me of this weird girl I knew when I was little. Why was the girl weird? Why does she remind you of her? Did you ever just get a feeling about someone? What feeling do you have? What is it? All those things. See how that there's just a natural response to all those things. So here's a simple 3-step action plan for creating a hook. Throw the hook out there. Here's, man, I don't believe this. Then shut up and force her to pry deeper. Very simple. So you say, man, I don't believe this. She's going to be like, and then you don't say anything. She'll be like, what? What don't you believe? Nah, just something that you reminded me of. Why? What did I remind you of? There's this girl that I knew back in high school. This girl was so weird. And you just got me thinking about her. Why was she weird, and why did I get you thinking about her? You know, you have this interesting quality about you, and it's not anything bad. I'm not saying you're weird like the girl, but you had a vibe that sort of like reminded me of that time when I was back in elementary school and hanging, you know, I used to pick on the girl, I'm not going to lie, but and I'm not saying you reminded me of her at all. But what I'm saying is that the feeling I got talking to you reminded me of that, like being back all young again. And, you know, I'm rambling here, but I'm just giving you an idea how you can just throw the hook out there. And you can even, like, you see how what I did there was I said, first I was like, man, I don't believe this. And then I said, you know, I can't believe this feeling I'm getting. What's the feeling? You totally remind me of someone. Who do I remind you of? This girl that was weird back in high school. Why was she weird? Why do I remind you of her? You're just constantly, like, everything you say is hooking her in deeper and deeper. And that is an excellent way to keep her attention and keep the conversation going. So let's talk about how you can get started now, because we've gone over quite a bit. You might want to watch this video more than once to really get, you know, a gist of what we're saying. I gave examples, but you don't need to use the examples per se that I've given, but you need to know why they work. Why do they create a hook? So let's give you something to do right away. Let's get started now. What I want you to do is write down 10 hooks you can try out. I gave plenty of examples of hooks. And come up with 3 open loop stories you can use for common questions. So I gave you the example of the American Beauty story when the girl says, "What do you do for a living?" And I say, "Do you ever see that movie American Beauty? You remember how he quit his job and worked at the burger joint and was so happy?" So what I did there was I started a whole new story from a common question. So you want to maybe have a story involved with what do you do for a living? Maybe another story from where are you from? So let's say a woman says, "Where are you from?" And let's say you're from Utah, you know, Salt Lake City, Utah. You're like, "Oh, I'm from Salt Lake City." Instead, come up with a story about Salt Lake City. Be like, "Do you ever hear of Mormons?" I'm not a Mormon, but it was actually funny. I was driving, I was at my hometown recently visiting my family, and there was actually a guy who had 3 wives walking into ShopRite, and I was wondering, you know, like what's the deal with that? Like, which of the wives get to choose what they eat? And I had so many questions going through my mind. It's so weird. So what you did there, and remember, I'm just coming off the top of my head here with stuff, so don't use my stories as examples or, you know, to go out and try. just use the theory behind them. Is that instead of just saying I'm from Salt Lake City, I brought up a whole new conversation. Like, instead of saying I'm from Salt Lake City, I said, it's funny, I was actually out and visiting my hometown. I didn't tell her it was Salt Lake City. I'm never, if you listen to what I said, I never said Salt Lake City. I said, and there was these Mormons, they have multiple wives. Which wife gets to choose, what we have for dinner? Is one of them for cooking? Is one of them, whatever you want to go for. But you never just answer the question with the fact. You create a story around it that holds the attention. So that's another one. What do I do for a living? Where are you from? Both great questions. Maybe a girl says, what do you do for fun? A lot of times when you're out and a girl sort of runs out of things to say, she goes, so what do you do for fun? The really question you're going to get a lot if you're out on a date for the first time, when she's trying to, like, in that get to know you mode, she's, so what do you do for fun? And instead of saying, like, well, I like to go bowling, hang out with my friends, drink, instead of just having those, like, factual answers, just have a story ready. What do you do for fun? Oh man, I was out with my my buddies the other night, and we were actually we were rock climbing. Something I just started doing, and one of my friends is climbing up the mountain, and he slips, and I'm like, oh my god, he's gonna fall. So I reach my hand out, hold him. That's an actual cliffhanger story that you can use, but you see what I did there, though? Like, instead of saying, what do you do for fun, and just answering, I tell a story with a cliffhanger in it so that she's forced to continue listening. So what I want you to do is, I want you to come up with 3 open loop stories, 10 hooks, and then I want you to go out and test the responses you get. Because once you see the response you get, your mind is going to start going, whoa, I can do this a lot more. I can keep coming up with new variations of it, and it gets really fun to do. So go out and test it and see how you can hold a woman's attention with this idea of using hooks. It works really well, and it's a great way to keep a conversation going. That's it for today. Today's lesson on